My own brother planted drugs in my room and had me arrested all to steal our family inheritance. Here's how I proved his betrayal and reclaimed my life. I was 26, living in our childhood home with my wife and working at the family business when my world exploded. That morning, I was upstairs in my room reviewing invoices when I heard frantic knocking at the door, so hard it shook the walls. My heart raced as I rushed downstairs, nearly tripping on the carpet. I threw open the front door to find 2 uniformed officers and my brother Jeremy standing on the porch. My wife Sarah hovered behind me, confusion etched on her face. Before I could greet them, one officer barked, "We have a warrant to search your home. You need to come with us." Bewilderment spun in my head. Search for what? I haven't done anything. In an instant, my wife's frightened gasp jolted me back to reality. Jeremy, dressed in a crisp suit, held a small, clear bag of white powder up to the sun. Cocaine by the looks of it. These were in his drawer, he said, voice eerily calm. My heart stopped. "That's not mine," I protested, but the officers moved in, roughly cuffing my wrist. As they led me out onto the porch, Sarah rushed forward, tears streaming. "John, you didn't do this. He's lying." But Jeremy's expression remained impassive, as though his brother's innocence didn't matter. Ignoring her, an officer forced me into the back seat of the cruiser, and the door slammed shut, leaving me staring helplessly at my wife's anguished face. The drive to the station was silent and tense. Jeremy sat in the front seat, head turned away, as if he couldn't bear to look at me. I pressed my forehead against the cool window, watching our neighborhood blur by childhood friends' houses, the park where we played as kids. I felt dizzy, betrayed by the man I trusted most. At the station, they booked me on felony drug possession with intent to distribute. The detective slammed photos of my room on the table open drawers, a floorboard slightly ajar, and someone's hand placing the clear bag beneath it. I tried to explain, "I work late. Anyone could have slipped it in," but my words vanished beneath Jeremy's stone-faced nod. In the holding cell, I sank onto the narrow bench, my wrists still stinging from the cuffs. The overhead lights flickered, casting harsh shadows on the concrete walls. I wrapped my arms around myself, recalling every time Jeremy and I had laughed together, family vacations, late-night talks on the porch. Now, his betrayal felt like a knife twisting in my chest. My mother arrived later that afternoon, rushing to the glass partition with eyes red from crying. She pressed her hand to the glass and said, voice trembling, "I know you're innocent, Michael." I choked on a sob, reminding her, "It's John." Her tears turned to horror as she realized her mistakes. She had come to see her son, not her other son. Duplicity. That night, I lay on the bunk beneath a weak fluorescent light, stomach churning with fear and rage. I replayed Jeremy's smug expression, the police's vindictive glee, my wife's devastated sobs. I pressed my palm against the cold concrete wall and vowed, I will expose what he's done. I will not let him take our inheritance or my life without a fight. As Act 1 closes, I looked up at the tiny barred window, the night sky's faint glow offering a sliver of hope. In the stillness, I whispered to myself, I'll prove the drugs were planted. I'll reclaim everything he stole from me. The next morning, I was escorted into a sterile interrogation room, walls painted institutional gray, harsh fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The detective slammed a photograph onto the metal table, a clear image of my bedroom drawer, the floorboard pried open, and a small bag of white powder resting in plain view. My chest tightened. "Explain this," he demanded. I swallowed hard and said, "It isn't mine. Someone planted it." He stared at me with cold disbelief. He grabbed the bag and pressed it against my chest. "Your brother turned you in. He says he found this in your room last night." I couldn't help but glare at Jeremy, seated behind the detective, his face blank, giving nothing away. I tried again, voice trembling. "I went to bed early. I was at Sarah's apartment last night until midnight." The detective raised an eyebrow. "We'll check that," he said dismissively, pushing the cell door open. At the preliminary bail hearing that afternoon, the prosecutor painted me as a drug dealer, hiding in plain sight. "Your Honor, this is a clear case. Illegal narcotics discovered in his bedroom by his own brother. We believe the intent was to distribute based on the bag's size and weight." My public defender, Diane Brooks, rose to argue that Jeremy's testimony and the bag itself were suspect, but the judge set bail at $200,000, cash only, an amount no one in my family could afford on short notice. Back in the holding cell that night, I pressed my forehead to the rough concrete wall, mind reeling. I tried to recall every moment of the previous evening, coming home after a late shift at the family business, greeting Sarah at her apartment, arriving at 11 p.m., then falling asleep by 1 a.m. The timeline was clear in my own head, but proving it would require more than memory. The next day, Diane visited during the 2-hour window permitted for legal consultations. She slid a folder across the glass partition, We need to challenge the evidence. First step, show that the bag's chain of custody is broken the moment your brother touched. Second, we need your alibi. Any receipts, texts, or witnesses saw you at Sarah's that night. I nodded, urgency in my voice. Sarah has everything: credit card receipts from the cafe at 9 p.m. and a neighbor's home security clip of me crossing their porch. After 11, Diane's eyes glinted with determination. We'll subpoena it all. Over the next days in the cell block, I replayed every word Jeremy had said to the police. He claimed to find the drugs under a loose floorboard, but I remembered putting away my textbooks the night before, tucking the floorboard shut myself. I scribbled notes on a scrap of paper: Jeremy home at 9 p.m., checked phone records, who else had access to our room. Mom cleaned last week, Dad fixed the drawer hinge. Even behind bars, I began piecing together how Jeremy might have orchestrated the setup. Late one afternoon, Diane managed to secure a handwritten affidavit from Sarah, who attested to my presence at her apartment from 8 p.m. until after midnight. She also provided time-stamped coffee shop receipts at 9:15 and 10 p.m. Meanwhile, Diane filed motions to suppress the bag as evidence due to improper seizing. No warrant for my room that night had been shown to me or Sarah. The document that arrived in my cell gave me a glimmer of hope. Motion hearing set for next week. That night, the cell block was quieter than usual. I lay on my bunk, tracing the edges of the coffee shop receipts in my mind, how the barista Luna recognized me at 9:15 p.m., how I'd sent Sarah a text at 10:05 saying, "See you soon." I pictured Luna's face, confident she'd testify. My anger towards Jeremy flared, but beneath it, a fierce determination. I would dismantle every lie he spun. On the day of the suppression hearing, I donned a freshly cleaned shirt, courtesy of Diane's office, and was led into the courtroom wearing a jumpsuit beneath. The judge, a stern woman with salt and pepper hair, presided from her bench. Diane stood and began, "Your Honor, we present Exhibit A, coffee shop video placing the defendant at 9:15 p.m., and Exhibit B, Sarah's affidavit. We also challenged the legality of the search, as no valid warrant was presented for the defendant's room." The prosecutor, Mr. Langley, fumed but remained silent. As Act 2 closes, the judge announced, "I will review the submitted evidence and determine whether to suppress the plastic bag. Court is adjourned until tomorrow." I exhaled, relief and anxiety mingling in my chest. Stepping out into the hallway, I glanced at the gallery to see my mother's tearful smile and Sarah's determined nod through the glass. Their faith gave me strength, one step closer to proving Jeremy's betrayal. The steel door slammed behind me as I was processed and ushered into the cell block. My hands still throbbed from the handcuffs, and I winced as the guard shoved me into a small, dimly lit cell. The walls were bare concrete, and the thin mattress on the bunk squeaked under my weight. A single bulb flickered overhead, casting long shadows that felt like judgment. Breakfast arrived at 6 a.m., a cup of watery coffee and a half-stale biscuit. I sat alone at the metal table, silently chewing, while the other inmates exchanged knowing looks. Whispers drifted across the room. Drug dealer caught red-handed, bet his own brother ratted him out. Each muttered word stung like an insult. I swallowed hard, determined not to let despair consume me. By mid-morning, we were herded to the yacht, a patch of cracked asphalt enclosed by chain-link fences topped with razor wire. The sky was overcast, but the chill in the air reminded me of how quickly hope can turn cold. Some inmates tossed a scuffed basketball, others clustered in groups, laughing harshly. I lingered at the fence, tracing the distant treetops, wishing I could slip through the wires and return to my old life. Back in the cell, I opened the tattered legal pad Diane had smuggled me and reread my notes: coffee shop receipts, Sarah's affidavit, Marcus's phone number. Each line felt like a lifeline. I closed my eyes and pictured Diane standing in court, holding up the surveillance footage frame by frame. Even behind bars, I clung to the glimmer of truth that would set me free. The days blurred together into a monotony of roll calls, meals, and endless waiting. At lunch, I overheard an inmate named Coop boasting about how easy it was to slip contraband into other people's cells. He smirked as he said, "If you're not careful, someone will plant something in your drawer and you'll wind up in cuffs just like that." His casual tone made me shiver, but I realized he was describing exactly what happened to me. That evening, Sarah visited through the glass partition. Her eyes were red from crying, but her voice was steady. I gave Diane the footage and Sarah's affidavit. "Marcus is willing to testify. We're going to fight this." I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, reaching toward her. "I trust you," I whispered. Her fingers brushed mine on the other side. In that moment, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. She was my anchor. Late at night, the cell block felt eerily silent. I lay on the bunk, staring at the ceiling, mind racing through every moment leading up to the arrest. I remembered locking my bedroom door and sliding the floorboard shut. I remembered Jeremy's cold stare as he handed the bag to the police. Anger flared within me, but I breathed deeply, reminding myself anger without action wouldn't change anything. One afternoon, a guard named Jackson approached my cell and slid a note under the door. Marcus's deposition is scheduled for tomorrow. Be ready. My heart pounded so loud I thought everyone would hear it. I clutched the note, reading Marcus's sworn words over and over. I saw John at my apartment until after midnight. He never came home until the next morning. That single piece of paper felt like a lifeline threading through the barbed wire of my situation. The night before Marcus's deposition, I lay on the bunk rehearsing what I would say in court. They planted those drugs. I was home working with Sarah until midnight. I traced each word on my breath, committing them to memory. Even in the darkness, I felt a flicker of hope warming the chill of the cell. As Act 3 closes, I sat by the small barred window, gazing at the sliver of sky above. The dim autumn light poured in, illuminating my face. I whispered, "Tomorrow, everything changes." In that quiet moment, I knew that my fight was far from over, but I was no longer alone, and justice felt within reach. While I anxiously awaited Marcus' deposition from behind bars, my mother refused to sit idle. She immediately drove to the coffee shop where I worked, meeting with the manager, Mr. Jenkins, and showing him the subpoena Diane had issued. Initially skeptical, he agreed to hand over the full security footage from April 10th. My mother left, clutching a hard drive labeled MacArthur Syncam, Quatriminal 04, Otubri 2024 back in the cell. My hands trembled as the guard slid the drive through the slot in my door. I quickly drew a diagram in my legal pad, timestamp at 10:45 p.m. of my exit from the cafe, 7 minutes before Jeremy later claimed to find the drugs. It was more than an alibi, it was proof of where I truly was. My heart pounded with a mix of relief and fear. If Jeremy's lies unraveled, everything changed. Meanwhile, my mother enlisted our family friend Daniel, an IT specialist, to analyze the footage. He extracted a clear clip showing me leaving the cafe at 10 hours, 45 minutes, and 12 seconds p.m., crossing the street in my work uniform. He noted the camera's metadata verified real-time unaltered. This video piece pierced the prosecutor's timeline like a scalpel no one could claim. I'd planted or possessed those drugs at that moment. Next, she approached Rosa, the barista who had closed the cafe that night. Rosa's eyes brimmed with tears as she signed a sworn statement. John was the last to leave at 10:45 p.m. I locked the door and drove home at 11. Her affidavit became Exhibit C combined with the footage. It painted a solid alibi. I was nowhere near my bedroom when Jeremy allegedly discovered the bag. My mother didn't stop there. She re-examined my bedroom's floorboards and found Jeremy's fingerprints on the same gap where the bag had been hidden. She mailed the print samples to a local forensic analyst, Dr. Price, requesting a comparison to Jeremy's prints. Within days, Dr. Price confirmed prints on the floorboard matched Jeremy Robinson. No prints of the defendant were found on the bag or hidden compartment. Armed with these breakthrough footage, Rosa's testimony, and the print analysis, Diane filed a motion to suppress the drug evidence entirely. Each exhibit was meticulously cataloged: timestamp slides, sworn statements, fingerprint comparison charts. The motion argued that the state's case was built on a foundation of planted evidence and perjured testimony, and that admitting it would violate due process. As the date of the suppression hearing approached, my mother uncovered one final piece of the puzzle: a series of text messages between Jeremy and our lawyer cousin, Brian, discussing greasing the wheels for inheriting Dad's estate. The messages hinted Jeremy's motive: eliminate me from the will by framing me for drug possession. Diane added these texts as Exhibit D, demonstrating a clear motive for Jeremy's betrayal. In the weeks leading up to the hearing, I spent my evenings rewriting my testimony in my legal pad: how I locked the floorboard, myself, how I returned late from work, and how Jeremy's phone logs placed him at our parents' vacation home during the alleged planting. That memory kept me grounded despite the bleak surroundings. I knew truth was on my side. On the eve of the hearing, Jackson, the sympathetic guard, slipped me another note: "Judge has reviewed exhibits. Hearing is your best chance." The words sustained me as I lay awake under the dim prison bulb, replaying every detail which my mother and Diane had painstakingly gathered. Tomorrow, I would finally confront Jeremy's lies in open court. Act 4 closes with my mother standing resolute outside the courthouse at dawn, arms folded over her binder of evidence. Across town, I sat on the bunk under flickering lights, drawing a deep breath and whispering, "We're ready. We'll end this tomorrow." The scene fades as the first rays of sunlight slip through my cell window, illuminating the path toward justice. The courthouse was buzzing with energy as I was escorted into the courtroom's defendant's box, wearing a plain-collared shirt provided by Diane's office. My parents sat in the front row, my father's expression stoic but hopeful. My mother's trembling hands clasped around a binder filled with evidence. As the bailiff called the hearing to order, my heart thundered in my ears. Ms. Caldwell, the prosecutor, rose first. She clicked through slides of the plastic bag containing cocaine found under my floorboard. "Your Honor," she declared, "the defendant's brother discovered these narcotics in his bedroom, a clear sign of possession. We maintain that the evidence was lawfully seized and that no planting occurred." Diane stood coolly and retorted, "Your Honor, We contend that the evidence was planted by the defendant's brother, Mr. Jeremy Robinson, to frame my client and seize the family inheritance. We will demonstrate through multiple exhibits how the state's case is built on perjured testimony and tainted evidence, the courtroom murmured as she clicked to Exhibit A, CCTV footage. On the large monitor, the timestamp, the 10th of April, 2024 to 10 hours, 45 minutes and 12 seconds p.m., glowed. The video showed me exiting the coffee shop in my work uniform. The judge leaned forward, scrutinizing every pixel. Ms. Caldwell attempted to interrupt, but Diane swiftly defended. This footage corroborates my client's alibi, placing him miles away from the scene when the drugs were allegedly planted. Next, Diane introduced Rosa, the barista, via a pre-recorded video affidavit. Rosa's voice crackled, but remained steady. I locked the cafe and left at 11 p.m. on April 10th. John was the last to leave, around 10:45. I did not see anyone else enter. A hush fell as her testimony underscored the impossibility of my involvement. Exhibit C followed. The independent forensic analyst, Dr. Price, took the stand to explain the fingerprint analysis. She displayed side-by-side charts showing Jeremy's fingerprints on the floorboard leading to the hidden bag. No fingerprints belonging to the defendant were found on that evidence, Dr. Price testified. The prosecutor's face paled as she glanced at her notes. Then, Diane presented Exhibit D, a series of text messages between Jeremy and his lawyer cousin Brian, discussing plans to eliminate obstacles to the inheritance. One message read, "Once John is out of the way, the house is mine." Diane's voice remained calm. This reveals Jeremy's motive, greed, demonstrating why he planted the drugs. Miss Caldwell rose for a final objection. These messages are hearsay, and the defendant hasn't testified. Diane countered by pointing out that evidence of motive is admissible, especially when it explains the accused actions. The judge conferred briefly with his clerk, then turned to the jury, or rather, in this bench hearing, to the record, and said, "I will now review the totality of evidence presented." After a tense recess, the judge returned with a solemn expression, tapped his gavel lightly, and addressed the court. Given the credible alibi established by Exhibit A, the uncontroverted eyewitness testimony in Exhibit B, the forensic analysis in Exhibit C, and the compelling motive evidence in Exhibit D, I find that the evidence supporting the charge is irreparably tainted. The motion to suppress is granted. All charges against Mr. Robinson are hereby dismissed, and he is free to go. A wave of relief crashed through me as the bailiff unclasped my cuffs. Diane placed a hand on my shoulder, her eyes glistening with triumph. My parents rushed forward as I stepped out of the box, my mother's tears wetting my shirt, my father's proud embrace. Exiting the courtroom into bright afternoon sunlight, I took a deep breath. Each inhale tasted like victory and vindication. Stepping out of the courthouse into the golden afternoon light was surreal. My parents flanked me, their faces alight with relief and pride. My mother wrapped me in an embrace so tight I felt as though she might never let go. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't handcuffed, just free, breathing the air I'd longed for. We returned to our childhood home, the place where so much pain began. As I walked through the front door, every detail seemed charged with new meaning. The worn hardwood floors where Jeremy and I played as kids, the kitchen where our family shared meals. Now, those spaces felt safe again. Reclaimed from betrayal, my mother prepared a simple meal of chicken soup and fresh bread, comfort food that once symbolized warmth, now tasted like redemption. We sat around the kitchen table, chairs drawn close. My father, normally stoic, looked at me and said, "I always knew you were innocent. I'm sorry we didn't see it sooner." I reached out, squeezing his hand, heart full of gratitude. The next day, I visited the coffee shop on MacArthur Street. Mr. Jenkins greeted me warmly, his eyes glistening. "I'm so sorry for doubting you," he said, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. I smiled and said, "Don't worry, the truth matters more than everything else." Rosa, the barista, offered a fresh cup of coffee this time. The cup stayed in her hands. Determined to use my ordeal for good, I founded Family Integrity, a nonprofit that helps families secure critical evidence and navigate wrongful accusations. We partnered with forensic experts to offer discounted services and with family counselors to provide emotional support. Our first workshop drew dozens of families, each sharing stories of fear and resilience. My mother became a champion in her own right, speaking at community centers and Families for Justice events. When she addressed the audience, she always opened with, "Love your children fiercely and never stop fighting for them." Her voice resonated with every parent who faced the nightmare of false accusations, giving them hope they hadn't thought possible. As for Jeremy, he moved out of our family home under legal agreement, relinquishing his claim to the inheritance. He avoided contact, but the court's decision protected our family legacy. His betrayal had cost him the love and trust we once shared, an irreversible lesson in how greed can destroy bonds. I resumed my role at the family business, but with a new focus on ethical transparency. I implemented checks and balances so no single individual could manipulate company records. Each policy I crafted was a tribute to the injustice I faced and a safeguard for others. To deepen my understanding of forensic science, I enrolled in a weekend certificate program on chain of custody best practices. Late nights were spent in dusty labs examining evidence handling protocols. Every pipette I held, every test I ran reminded me of the plastic bag that nearly ruined my life and how attention to detail can mean the difference between guilt and innocence. Now, as I look forward, I hold two truths close. Betrayal by someone you love cuts deeper than any prison wall, but the power of truth and persistence can set you free. If you or anyone you know faces a similar nightmare, remember, gather evidence, trust your allies, and refuse to let lies stand. Truth endures, Avin. When family fails,